Okay, Mr. Watson here, and in this video we're going to talk about functions of muscles, or we could word this like the roles of muscles. Okay, so during movement, skeletal muscles play a specific role, and we're going to look at 4 of them roles today. Okay, now the role that the muscle plays will change depending on what type of contraction we've got or what type of movement, but we're just going to give you the general roles that a muscle can fulfill during movement. And in order to start there, we're going to just have a little reminder of antagonistic pairs and basically some common rules that we should really know about muscles to put context to all of this. And we should know this from GCSE, but we'll just do a quick recap. So muscles never work alone, okay, which is why we're obviously going to go on and talk about antagonistic pairs. Why do they never work alone? Muscles cannot push, they only pull, okay, and in order to do that, they work as a pair and create opposite movements, and that's how we can still get joint movements by only having pulling actions. They work in a pair. They must be paired, basically, in order to work. And these pairs are called antagonistic pairs. Okay, so just some of them are popular examples of antagonistic pairs. We've got the deltoid and latissimus dorsi functioning with the shoulder, bicep brachii, tricep brachii, apology, that should say biceps and triceps, gluteus maximus and the iliopsoas, so basically the gluteals and the hip flexor muscles, quadriceps and hamstrings. That's on there for presentation purposes. Ideally, we would have rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, etc., etc. And the gastrocnemius and tibialis anterior. So just to give a bit of context of why we have these pairs, and within that we have roles within the movement, which will involve some additional muscles and not just those that are in the pair. So let's start with the agonist and antagonist, okay? And starting with the agonist being the focal point. Agonists are producing the most force around a joint and causing movement. So the agonist is the muscle that provides the major force to complete the movement that we want, okay? So on the picture there you can see flexion of the elbow, okay? So the biceps brachii is the agonist. And because they provide the major force, okay, they're also called prime movers, okay? Agonists are also called prime movers because of that reason above. So this term prime mover basically describes the muscle, in this case the biceps brachii, that directly performs a specific movement. So the specific movement we've got here is flexion of the elbow, okay? So the bicep brachii is acting as the prime mover in flexion of the forearm, flexion of the elbow, okay? But as we've just discovered on the last slide, or recapped on the last slide, needs to work with an antagonist, okay? And the antagonist, which we can already see on the diagram, is going to be the triceps brachii. And antagonists, when contracting, directly oppose the agonist, okay? The antagonist directly opposes the agonist. So as our biceps brachii is contracting, and in another video we'll go into how it's contracting, and in the diagram you can see it's contracting concentrically, okay? But basically, when the biceps brachii is contracting, the triceps brachii must be relaxed, okay, in order to allow movement. So the antagonist opposes that movement and it relaxes to allow flexion of the elbow, okay? Because it doesn't want to impede the flexion. It understands we want the flexion to happen, okay? So it relaxes and allows it to happen. So there, as I've just explained, the tricep brachii is acting as the antagonist and relaxing to allow flexion of the elbow. Now, something that gets confused a lot is we often get confused thinking the agonist is always the muscle that is shortening. But that's something to be discussed in my movement analysis video, and I'll briefly mention it also as we're discussing concentric and eccentric contractions, because we'll need to understand when we're moving against gravity and with gravity. But for now, okay, the antagonist it relaxes and allows movement of the agonist. Okay, so moving on to the next one, the synergist. Okay, now the synergist contracts at the same time as the agonist. Okay, a synergist adds to that force. So as I mentioned, the agonist provides the major force, okay, to get around the joint movement that we want. And a synergist adds to that force to almost complement the agonist and produce a more efficient movement. Okay, that's its role to assist the agonist. It also does help stabilize a joint to make this movement efficient. Because obviously when we think about efficient movement, it means we only want flexion of the elbow. Okay, so to avoid any other movements, synergists also help stabilize joints, but they also help create the movement and add to that force. Okay, so for example, the brachialis is a synergist to the biceps brachii. So there's the biceps brachii, okay, the short head and the long head, and sitting underneath is the brachialis. Now we also have the brachioradialis, but we'll just focus on one today. This would be an example of a synergist, and a synergist would usually be a smaller muscle. In fact, it usually always is. Okay, so as you can see there, the brachialis isn't as big as the biceps brachii, which you can see, even though it's faded out, is much longer. Okay. And finally, we have the fixator. Okay. Now, the example I put on the screen there is one of the rotator cuffs. I was going to put them all on, the 4 that we need to know, but we just put one for now. We've got the supraspinatus. Okay. Now, the fixator generally function as joint stabilizers. Okay, it stabilizes the origin. Okay, stabilizes the origin of the joint. Okay, and it again is kind of helping the agonist function most effectively. So a bit like I mentioned with the synergist also does this. It stabilizes the joint. Okay, but the fixator won't add to the force, it will just solely act as a joint stabilizer. So what a fixator is doing is it's eliminating unwanted movement of the agonist's origin. Okay, so as you can see there, the biceps brachii up attaching to the scapula, and we can see one of the rotator cuffs helping as a fixator, as it also has attachment points there. We could also say this is the deltoids also in our bicep curl, helping to do that. Okay, and as a general rule, the majority of fixator muscles are found working around the hip and shoulder joints. Okay, it's where a lot of our rotator cuff muscles, and the rotator cuffs here on the screen can be known as the guardians of the shoulder joint. Okay. So just as a little overview then, with the example, put that all together. We've got a bicep curl here going in the upwards phase. The agonist would contract. Okay, the agonist contracts. It's providing the major force. Okay, doing a lot of the work. We want this to be efficient. Okay, so there's the agonist, the biceps brachii. The antagonist would relax. So that's the triceps brachii. It allows flexion of the elbow to happen. Okay. The synergist would assist the agonist, which would be the brachialis we saw on the last slide. And then the fixator stabilizes the origin. And I've just located the deltoid there to keep the diagram simple, but also the rotator cuffs. Okay, so that would be putting all of that together and simplifying their roles. Okay, So that's a video on functions of muscles or the role of muscles. Okay, thank you.